That's right. um, so we're going to do a little panel, but in the end, it's going to be a community conversation. So I'm going to call John, Gus, Joanne. Come on up. Where's Camilla? She should come up as well. What the topic is what should we have as our conference topic next year? Now, I just want to get one piece of warning. The tendency on this thing is once we start to say this, it like mushrooms. You say, Scottish culture. Oh, that's dance, that's fashion, that's theater. You really have to kind of zero in. Doesn't matter about throwing something out, but in the end, we've kind of got to narrow it down. We can't do all that we want. Joanne, you need to come up here. I got you. So I'm just going to start by having each panelist kind of give their 2 cents worth about what they think, and then we're going to open it up. Oh, Bruce says that's going to take forever. Okay. So, okay. Well, John, why don't you kick it off? What about next year?
And I will recognize you, Bruce. You know that. Well, a couple of thoughts. I think we need to have a frame of reference in mind for what we are trying to do with these SNALC conferences before we take it down the next level, and that is what is going to be the focus for next year, or the year after that, or whatever. The word leadership is in the name, but leadership can mean many things. And as I have said before at these things, to my mind, it was never supposed to be for elected leaders from Plant Societies and St. Andrews Society. It's supposed to be for opinion leaders. And all of you are opinion leaders because you're well informed, you care about your Scottish heritage, you're engaged in one or more ways with it, which makes you a leader. So that, to my mind, is what leadership in the name is all about. Although we have talked about changing the name of the conference, we talked about that last year because a number of the people who were here said that it was an impediment to getting some people to come because they didn't feel, because they weren't the elected leader of some group or other, that they didn't think it was for them, which is not ever our intention. And as you know, that's not what it's all about. So I think we have to deal with that, and we will. We'll look at it again. But what we have here is an example of partnering, which we were talking about earlier, is one of the things we need to do as resources become scarcer, is to partner. So we have 5 or 6, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6, organizations which are members of the steering committee, and that can grow, and I think we might want to add some more. We don't want to make it 50, but we could maybe add a couple more, especially if we go to other parts of the country, which we're looking at. This has been a great conference at Detroit. I love this facility. I wish our St. Andrews Society in Washington, D.C. had something like what you have here. It's very special. Not only the physical plant, but the AV setup and the staff support and the meal service and everything. It's great. You really have a gem here. You're very fortunate. So you've done it now twice in a row, and I think it's only fair that we do what we said we were going to do, which was to move it around. So we're going to be looking at that in several places that have expressed an interest, and we haven't decided. We need to talk about it. But it will be somewhere else, and we need to let people know that early enough so that they can make some plans to attend. And if we can't physically get there, we need to be able to provide the level of AV support that these wonderful guys have provided wherever we go, because we've now created... We've now created that expectation, rightly so, that people who are not able to come can still participate in this conference, see it either live or as a recording, click on a link. So That's something we're going to have to work into wherever we go. I am less concerned about the theme, the topic, than I am about these issues that I just outlined to you, because it's not easy to do this. I mean, Gus has been doing it, John has been doing it, you've all been involved in it for the last several years. It was in Guelph in Canada a couple of years ago, and there's a lot of stresses and strains and pains in putting on one of these things, some of which is created by the fact you have a steering committee of 5 groups. But most of it just has to do with the fact that it's tough to put on a conference with volunteers. It just is, and we've all been there. We all know that. So I'm less concerned about that. I think we need to get the feedback from you all and others who've been here in past years as to what you want to see the theme be, and then we need to figure out how to package that. So I think it needs to come from the bottom up, and you are part of the sourcing of that. So I want to hear from you. I don't really have a strong feeling about the subject matter, as long as it somehow is connected to leadership and to involvement, engagement in our Scottish heritage.
I think that the word I've heard quite a few times is referring to us as a council. And I quite like that word, so the Scottish North American Leadership Council. So we're like the steering body would be the council. So I throw that back out. I'm very pleased to see our website is there. I think we can use it as a tool. We can be active during the year. For instance, as we talked about education, putting things on there so that we become this portal of information of these leading groups. Because we're endorsing these situations. So, I mean, that people then look and respect and see us as a direction giver. We all work well together, and I think that's just that. Our former chairman, Alan Bain, as did Wayne Redford, really believed that we had to have collaboration. So adding good partners to the steering group makes a lot of sense. And over the topic, I defer to others, and we're here that New York is here to help and see what we can do. But I think we need to build on our brand to the point of needing to attract younger people. They look for things on social media. They look for these different things. And I'm delighted that Bart is there to assist and help in all of that side of things. We don't have a Facebook, but do we need it when all of us have our own Facebooks? But we've got to think about these different things and build out our brand. So over to you.
I agree with both Camilla and John, particularly the point about what are we here to do that John was making. I'll recall the remarks of a couple of the speakers that we've heard from. Lord Lyon talked about respect, resilience, and renewal. I would argue that those are 3 things that we as Scottish organisations and a council, if you like, of the leadership ought to be mindful of also. And also Rory had talked about this being a movable feast, going from location to location and having the local buy-in, just as Detroit and Chicago and Canada have hosted. I think our next venue ought to be given the opportunity to put their mark on the conference and give it some of for them to take ownership of it. Rory also talked about engaging the next generation, which is something this conference has focused on since its inaugural conference in Chicago. Some of the techniques that Bart mentioned and Camilla has just mentioned will help with that, but I think we ought to then go to the next host and ask them to give some opportunity for a new generation of volunteers to put their hands on the driving wheel. And so far as a theme, I mean, the obvious thing to me for next year, it being the anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, for all its interesting stuff, perhaps what that represents is freedom. I think I was talking with Camilla yesterday evening. Surely we should at least pay attention to the concept of freedom in the year of that anniversary. What does freedom mean? Who are the groups who've grappled with it? You know, do we engage others from outside of the community to talk about what freedom means to them and their experience of it? That would be of great interest to me, and I think we can use that to build linkages between ourselves and between other organizations. I take the point that John made also, that if we are too broad in our theme, we can lose focus. Over dinner last night, John said that last year the conference was terrific. I really enjoyed it. It got, you know, the panels moved from the various areas that make up Scottish culture, be it music, fashion, art, literature, and so on. But though we had a great time, there wasn't a kind of a singular focus. So if we're too broad, I think we can do ourselves a disservice. So whereas freedom is a huge important subject, we should really focus on one aspect of it.
And because we chatted a little bit about this, tying it back to Scotland each time. So when we say about the different groups, we include them, but we also include the Scottish counterpart on that subject and idea. So I'm quite intrigued by that.
I know we haven't gotten to Joanne yet, and I apologize. This freedom notion, I think we're onto something there. We haven't discussed this before. You know, from my little temper tantrum yesterday, I have a very different view on the value of the Declaration of Arbroath to Scotland and the world than do some others. But I'm not alone, and the Scottish government shares that. Now, they have some political reasons in mind, like all politicians, because they want to do Independence 2 very soon, and if Boris Johnson continues to do his thing, it's going to happen. And as Henry McLeish, who was here 4 years ago, has said more recently, if they screw up Brexit in such a way that it really, really hurts Scotland, a lot of people who voted to stay last time will vote to leave next time, and I will be one of them. And he said that publicly, and some of you here heard him say that last year. And that's from a lifelong unionist. So next year is going to be very, very interesting. Even if we don't focus on freedom, Scotland's going to be focused on freedom, both from 1320 and from 2020. And I think it's a theme in Scottish history. We all know it's a theme in Scottish history. Liberty, and you can take it right through to the National Covenant and a lot of other things. The things that motivated Scots to fight at home and to leave and come here. I mean, it's a constant recurring theme. And I think it's going to be a thought form on the minds of everybody in Scotland, everybody in Britain. Next year, we ought to include it.
Let me build on
Let
me build on that a second, though. First,
we can't be political.
No,
That's all I'm just
this
saying.
is not. This is
No,
not.
that's what
My point here is that what John is tying into is what is occurring in Scotland next year, and is there a potential theme? And that's one thing I think we always need to have one mind on. What is happening in Scotland? I mean, Charlie mentioned, I think in 2000, or maybe it was Camilla, 2001 or 2 is the 22, the year of word. That kind of gives you some hint of what, you could either do in 2022, you could do the word, or you could do it in 21 to provide a lead-in for Scotland. This is supposed to be a collaboration with Scotland. It might be helpful for us to kind of integrate with some of their themes to kind of help promote in that respect. Now, let me talk 1 second about the broader question, because, Bruce, I am a strong believer in genetics. And, my family business is politics. My grandfather was a East Texas Justice of the Peace back when Justices of the Peace in Texas had a certain flavor to them. My dad was a politician, and like Lord Dunn Russell, my mother was a politician in her own right. My sister is a politician. I am, my wife, my son. We're politicians. So we are sensitive. We have radar. And when someone says something, you say, okay, is that a subtle attack? Or is it an opportunity? Gus says we need to think about passing the wheel to the younger generation. Now, I note that Gus was born in 1969 when I graduated from high school. I think he's the younger generation. I saw that as an opportunity. That's just a note. But go ahead, Camilla, you had a point.
I think that next year symbolizes through the 700th anniversary freedom. And freedom has many guises. And Scotland has been a great place for freedom. I know that the LGBT situation is very important to them, to speak out for personal freedoms, the different religious situations there. And I think we could tie in to a lot of that without having to get sort of into whether there's a referendum or there's not a referendum or there is this, that, and the other. So I think that is about people leaving Scotland and coming here for their freedom, their persecutions, all of that. So, it goes right the way back. And I think we'll be, so over to you guys.
Just to mention that this time of year, next year, everyone will be thinking about politics anyway, you can't really dodge that altogether. And I understand what Camilla's sensitivity is, that, oh gosh, we don't want to be sort of politicizing this organization at all.
We're not allowed to as 501c3s.
Right.
Well, we're
We
not a
have to
501c3.
No, but as as separate organizations.
But clearly there will be a lot of interest in the country at that time anyway in concepts like freedom and what it represents to different people. And I think, while you were all speaking just now, Bruce sort of passed me a little note, which was the old saying that freedom from for the fox is different for freedom for the chickens, and the old ideas of freedom from and freedom to are still very, very topical and worth exploring, I think, without having to be party political in any sense. The very fact that the word liberal in this country means the opposite of what the word liberal means in Australia, for instance, in terms of party political affiliation, is sort of opens people's minds to the idea that it doesn't have to be party political. The concepts are interesting in themselves. And that's whose service is for perfect freedom. We can also talk about boundaries if we're going to talk about freedom. And the idea of freedom and boundaries is very much part of what was on people's minds in 1320. And, maybe you could sort of build something along that.
Well, I think that this discussion really shows the potentiality, perhaps, of this topic. It's important to remember that even though the debate about what role our both played with the Declaration of Independence, documents can take a life of their own separate from their words and their timing. For instance, the whole notion that the Magna Carta somehow is the birth of the British Constitution. If you go to look to the words of the Magna Carta, where is the Constitution in it? It grew to be something much broader and much more meaningful than what it simply did. And the chickens were able to steal the fox's thunder in that instance. Maybe not as effectively as we would have liked, but nonetheless became something more than just the document that protected the foxes. Bruce, you wanted to say something, I think. Go ahead. Okay. Microphone.
Just to give Bart another job, if you're putting on the websites something that I think you raised, is it Mr. Cameron or Campbell? It's another Campbell. I knew something was twisted in there. I wasn't sure if it was the nose or the mouth, but sorry, but
that didn't come out sounding right. We all know what you meant.
Edit that out, please. But one of the things that this group does, I think, very well is it'll produce ideas, and then how does this reach the San Francisco St. Andrews Society or the other St. Andrews Society around the country? How does what goes on in leadership capacity up here turn out to be of value to the people it's presumably hoping to lead? And apart from putting on, as I was mentioning earlier, a list of books and a selection of short videos and clips and access to webinars and courses, you could even have a speakers bureau of sorts, so that if you're hosting something in your St. Andrews Society in Nebraska, you might want to be able to bring in a speaker. You might want to have the contact information for a Bruce Jury, a Graham McKenzie, and any of the leadership people who could come down and maybe talk about some of these issues. And I don't know. So you could maybe, what I'm suggesting is that there's some editing that goes on, and not everybody who says, I might want to go to, be an after-dinner speaker in the St. Andrews Society of wherever it is, would end up being down there. Some vetting would have to go on, but I think it's it's another resource that you can offer.
Let me just clarify, because I started this in a way. Let me just clarify what I was getting at. I'm not suggesting that we should be political, but I think we miss an incredible opportunity and stick our heads in the sand. If we have a conference next year where Brexit is going on, and if Scottish independence is on the table, and we don't acknowledge it, I mean, that's the current world. It's very interesting to look back 500 years, but if that's happening then, and we don't somehow fold in some educational aspect of it, we are remiss. Now, I'm not promoting Scottish independence. My personal views are very strongly unionist. Not that I'm voting in Scotland. I'm not. None of us are. So that's an important point. That's somebody else's decision. But I think if they are making it, and they'll certainly have made it Brexit by then, and possibly on another level, we need to acknowledge that, and I think fold into the discussion somehow some references to it. But the theme is much bigger than that, and I think others have touched on that. We're talking about a thread that runs through Scottish history and is going to be, on display in current time, and we need to focus on that. That's my view.
Other go ahead.
I do want to just say to Andrew's point very quickly that we do collaborate and we do share ideas and we do share speakers and we do try to help make projects happen because of that collaboration. And perhaps that's something we need to sing about more now that we have a more active website. So and share that during the year so they see the value to what SNALC gets up to. Sorry, Joanne.
Quite all right. Thank you. I was thinking, and it's to John Belisai's first point, because of the word leadership. So I share the information with all our member groups, but we need to make it clear to them that members of member groups are welcome to attend as well, that we sort of have to minimize the word leadership and promote that it is much more open to anybody who's interested.
We've tried to be saying, lend your voice, be a part of this, and I think that's maybe the SNALC is the top bit, but we got to get a good byline, and I like the word freedom, and I think we can push the inclusiveness. I think it is about inclusiveness, something like that.
Yes, we have Lynette here. Let's get Lynette a microphone so that it'll be picked up on the YouTube.
Thanks, John Cherry, for all that you've done to put this together and to help organize your committee. We were glad to help you and bring this forward. And I'm new to the leadership committee organizational thing, but I've always felt that the leadership word has limited our attendance. Even in our own St. Andrew's Society, there are so many people not here who would have loved to hear and learn about this, but are taken aback that, well, I'm not a leader, and it's expensive. So it is not inclusive. And you can say we want your voice, it's inclusive, and maybe it isn't intended to be inclusive. Maybe this is a leadership conference where we're all to go back and determine, now that I've learned this, how do I lead with it? Or do we want the people here to hear about it firsthand? I've always felt sensitive about that so many people aren't here. And this program's been wonderful. And if next year you do a YouTube piece, maybe each group, society, St. Andrews groups, could do something like a month later saying, we're having a presentation on these speeches, we're going to project it, but we're having drinks or coffee or snacks. Everybody come in here, because everyone couldn't come that day. But it needs to be inclusive. And to Lord Lyon's point again, renewal. Do we want to just, the tradition is that we always do this, and I know we're trying to break out of that. But to bring youthful people in, well, let's bring people in of our own age or whoever wants to come in, and then there are more people for it to trickle down to. And I really think that's important. So much work goes into this. We had so many brilliant people talking and speaking and questioning, and it's just a wealth of knowledge, and I feel very privileged to have been here for it, but I'm not sure how to share that with everyone. So that's my...
Lynette, could you hand it to Bob? Thanks.
Yeah, Lynette, I agree with you 100%, ditto on everything. And I'll just say this, for the past few years, I've always thought that they should be called the North American Annual Conference rather than Leadership Conference, because I think it would reach far greater impact in the community. And that word leadership, as Lynette says, is a stumbling block for a lot of people.
David, I see you're wanting to raise your hand. Go right ahead. Don't pay attention to Lord Dunn Russell. You get the floor.
I'll reference Lord Dunn Russell in my comments. So two thoughts. I've always liked the phrase going from strength to strength. And so I think focusing on Arbroath next year with a mind then also an eye towards Year of the Word and to Walter Scott, so each sort of having their moment, recapturing history, and then looking forward to what's next. And so that's incorporating what we heard from Rory and what we hear from Visit Scotland and what Lord Dunn Russell brings to us, and all with the kind of their fingers maybe more on the pulse of Scotland. That's one thought. The second is maybe one way of addressing it in a way getting around the political question is if anyone's been in the library for reasons other than dessert, on the mantle there, the fireplace mantle, is a quote attributed to Voltaire, and that is, we look to Scotland for all our ideas of civilization. So I think anything that we can do to, yes, acknowledge the technical bits and operating details, but then let it bubble up to what does this really mean in macro to us and to the world, and I think that's one way to continually renew our relevance and what we're trying to do here. Leadership, and then much beyond leadership as well, sort of reaching out. I understand the word diaspora is maybe a little bit charged, but sort of reaching out to the whole diaspora, and yes.
Bruce.
By the way, Bruce, I got a text from our friend Nicola, who is from Oklahoma. She had to leave to take care of some technical issues with a visit she's planning. But she said she owes you some money for a book, and she'll leave it at the reception at the hotel.
Okay, I live and I work and I vote and I pay my taxes in Scotland. I'm embarrassed how little Scotland does for the Scottish North American community. I'm sorry, it's painfully obvious that they don't really care, other than just to give, when you compare what the Irish do, for example, for the Irish community over here, they're only, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but the only reason the Scottish government engages with you guys is because they're hoping you'll all put some money into investing in a glass factory in Kilmarnock. They see it as that way. They do not see themselves as having a development role, a stimulation role within this community here. And I think that there are people in this room who have been struggling with that for 20 years or more. I don't know what the answer is. Is there any way we can use this forum to embarrass him into doing more?
Well, I think let me speak for a moment as a political scientist, because there is a significant difference between Ireland and Scotland. And that can spell the difference in terms of the relationship. Ireland is an independent nation. Scotland is not. It may become, and if it does, they will view their relationship with the United States in a completely different way. And if we are strong as a diaspora group, we're in a position to help solidify that relationship. I know I got something going there, so go ahead.
Well, just two things very quickly on that. One is Ireland has a minister of the diaspora. Scotland does not within the Scottish government. So a number of us a while back got interested in, what does the Irish minister of the diaspora do? What's their remit? Maybe we could persuade the Scottish government this is something worth having. Well, I met the Irish minister for the diaspora. He came to San Antonio and did little presentations. So I said, well, what's your job, really? And he said, well, really, it's to look after any Irishmen who end up drunk and in prison. So, and we're quite happy to have, to encourage, business development and investment back in Scotland. But it wasn't, as we might hope it would have been, something to do with sort of cultural enhancement and soft power and so on. That was not what he was about at all. The other thing is, the only other of these conferences I've been to is the one that was in Chicago, where John Thurso came as the chairman of Visit Scotland. And I remember a bunch of us sort of put him under some pressure at the time and said, Stone Mountain had just been 2 weeks earlier, and I showed him the pictures with the as soon as you walk in the gates, the Irish Tourist Board is displayed in this supposedly Scottish festival as the principal sponsor. And I said it's deeply embarrassing to a number of us to have the Irish Tourist Board prominently, underwriting this Scottish event. And why don't you spend more money? Why don't you invest more in this country on encouraging? And he said, frankly, we have limited resources, and it doesn't make sense for us from a business standpoint to spend the money where we know we're going to get the visitors anyway. Our message is already out there thanks to your organizations, and we can get far more bang for the buck for our taxpayers' dollar by investing in the India, China, the Middle East. There's way more upside over there, and so it's a cold, sensible business decision on their part. It doesn't mean they don't love America. They do. They don't. It's not mean they don't love the diaspora. They do. And I think there's a real awareness within the Scottish government that there's strong connections now between the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs and the Scottish government, who are working on heritage ideas, and there's money available for clans to hold clan events from the Scottish government. They will help sponsor that. They're going to help provide some money for our clan events next year in the Isle of Lewis. This stuff goes on all the time. I think it's not like they don't care at all.
But and I agree with you. But my sense is, if there is independence, the dynamic changes. And here's just one little minor thing. Here in Michigan, there is an American Council for Ireland, because it's an independent nation. I mean, it's a Michigan citizen who's functioning in that capacity for the nation of Ireland. There is no Michigan citizen functioning in that capacity for Scotland, because there's no nation of Scotland, but there's a Michigan citizen functioning in that capacity for Great Britain. So, I mean, that alone does something about the relationship between those parties. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that to advocate one result or the other in terms of a decision about independence, but if that is to occur, I think we'll see a significant change in the nature of the relationship between the two countries.
John,
yes.
I wanted to just to Bruce. The Scottish government have been very generous to this conference. Their support, financial support, has helped us put this conference on. Rory drove literally. Right.
Yes, very.
Rory literally drove from Chicago, where he'd been for 3 days, attending our events, meeting our members, being very active with our community. He's coming back again in December for St Andrew's Day dinner, and we're already planning his involvement with a couple of Burns suppers that we're hosting. The tourist board have also taken an active role in the cultural life of the Chicago Scots. So, yeah, I know, Camilla, that you've worked with the government. So though Rory is not here today, I think without Rory, without Joni in Washington, D.C., we would have struggled to put this conference on.
And something that Rory mentioned was the grants, that they have now set up a system for us all to be able to put certain programs around the diaspora to them. We have to do it with good lead time, and we have to show the whole scope of it. But they have a formal process in place that they didn't have a few years ago. So, so I do think that they are trying to show more effort towards us. And I think the Scottish, the Clans and Families Forum, which John Belisai and I are both on for our organizations, which is with the Standing Council and other diaspora organizations around the world, is a time when we can stress what we can do as a group for them here.
All of that is true, but what Bruce says is somewhat true too, and that is, a few years ago when they had the Splash of Tartan as the theme for the Edinburgh tattoo, and all the clans came in with all of their chiefs for a whole month and filled the stadium there, and the royals came in as well, arm in arm with a lot of the chiefs who also happened to be peers. And the Scottish government sat there and saw that, and they heard the cash register ringing, because it did. And this SNP government, for all of its, whatever you think about it, has been willing to be more flexible in terms of seeing the value of engaging with the diaspora. That is clearly true. There is some self-interest in that, because they finally realize that people go to Scotland for heritage reasons, and when they get there, they're going to spend their money. Just like the people who go for the Edinburgh Festival and they go for golf and other reasons, the money is the same color. And they finally realize that it's another way to get people to go to Scotland. Okay, fine. nothing wrong with that. But there's something in it for us too, because they are finally listening to us. You know, the labor governments that preceded them didn't want to have anything to do with heritage people in Scotland or here in America because it was regressive, and in their worldview, it was radioactive. Okay, this government does not see it that way. So let's take advantage of that. It's not what we want it to be. It's not even half a loaf, but it's a start. So, you know, they're showing up at these things, and they're putting some money on the table. Anytime you can get Scots to give you their money rather than take your money, you're ahead of the game. And let's thank them for it.
Well, you know, and what this discussion tells me, that regardless of what value, and a topic does imply some sort of value, no matter what value we address at a future conference next year or subsequent years, that one component of that conference needs to be, how do we use that value to enhance our relationship with Scotland? By way of example, if the topic is freedom and the role that Scots played in enhancing that value, then how do we use that value to enhance our role in building a relationship between the diaspora and Scotland? So I mean, I think we have to use that. It has to be part of the component, part of the conference is how do we use the value? Oh, need a microphone for her. Aha, there we go.
I think the big difference in the Irish situation and the Scottish situation is that money went freely from the United States for many, many years to support their independence. The money still flows, and they still want that relationship because they're getting the money. The Scottish situation has not been the same, and they haven't had to rely on the United States to get money over there. So I think it has something that they have to build their desire to keep that relationship.
I mean, I think you're correct that there's a lot of self-starting flow of dollars that go to Ireland, and I can, we'll leave it at that. Bruce?
Just a point of information, I mean, for a few years I was quite deeply involved with the Scottish Government and Visit Scotland matters, and I was involved in this committee and that panel and this steering group. And I pulled out of it largely because I tried very hard for about 4 years to get the words ancestral tourism into any strategic document. And I was constantly turned down, and finally someone lost the patience and explained to me why. He said, we cannot acknowledge that ancestral tourism is the single major reason why people come to Scotland, because that will annoy the hotel guys and the golf guys back in Scotland. They've got to be seen to, and we need their money to run things back here. So it actually got knocked down. It got knocked out as even being acknowledged as a reason why people went. And I used to say, listen, if they come here to look up their ancestors, they're going to play golf and they're going to stay in a hotel. I mean, these things are.
But you won. Now ancestral tourism is a huge heading.
They had to wait till I left.
Well, I need to wrap this up because it is approaching the noon hour, and we have to begin to terminate because it's an active facility, and we will be invaded by the St. Andrews Pipe Band, and we will not be able to conduct the conference much longer. But I do want to say before we break up, I need to give a special thank you. Our local committee did, I think, an outstanding job in putting together the effort to host the conference. And, I may be the face of that, but you need to know we have Aaron Douglas. He handles all the hospitality. His wife is a partner in all of that. So, they transformed the room after we trashed it yesterday. They've done a super job all weekend. Lynette McLeod Ann Campbell is back here. You know, I was only able to do that, to do this because Ann and Lynette just kind of kept me straight and kept me focused. Lynette? Yes. Right. Yep. Yep. Yes. You know, Doug, as Camilla will testify, did an outstanding job. I mean, he put flyer after flyer out, and in the website just did a great job. Chris McKenzie helped put together the entertainment and activities, and we appreciate that Chris did. And so that committee just did an outstanding job, and this would not have happened without their very hard work. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Did I catch everybody? Well, huh? I got Aaron first. And then, you know, Pete and Tom Brahma are the two IT consultants that have, you know, last year was kind of their baptism by fire with this conference. And actually, it turned out pretty good. But we did learn a few things, and it's gone even much smoother this year. So, I mean, every time there was a video conference participant, you know, that was lined up. I mean, they were coached on how to do it by Pete and Tom. They got them online so that, boom, it happened. They had their slides. It was smooth to all of us. But I want to tell you, those two worked very hard to make it happen. And of course, you know, it was all of you that in the end brought it all together and made it very interesting. A great team of presenters, a great group of collaborators here. And so we all want to say thank you for attending. Thank you for participating. And for those here at the front, please hang around for a second because we want to get some pictures too. So again, thank you. And look forward, first of all, feel free to go and promote the Detroit Scots YouTube channel, which, as he says, video segments from the conference will be posted next week. We want this video conference to be distributed across the North American diaspora because A, it's a good conference, but secondly, it will also help promote next year's conference. So we want this thing to continue to build. So with that, thank you very much. Travel safe on your way home.